And there's no race to give it all first between you and Buffett and Gates, right?
And I would not try to compete in that battle. They won that before the got fired.
I have 5,000 questions for Steve, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions as well. I just have one more, and I hope you don't mind me getting a bit philosophical here, but what's your greatest fear? And this could be something with your own community, with our country, with this planet itself, with the international governments. What do you fear the most these days?
Well, there's a bunch of things to worry about. The one I particularly focus on is making sure, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, making sure we do everything we can to remain the world's most entrepreneurial nation. I think it's a really big deal. I think people don't understand how important it is. As I said, the story of America is the story of patriots and what happened in Liberty Bell and all the rest of the stuff. Obviously Philadelphia being a key part of that story. It's awesome. But the story also are these entrepreneurs who built these companies and built these industries and built these regions. If you look at the story of every major region, Detroit was Silicon Valley 50 years ago. When the automobile was a big innovation, that was like the center of economic vitality. That's true with regions all around the nation, and that's really what led us to our prominence as a nation, our influence as a nation, our success as a nation. And so making sure that we don't get complacent about that's really important. The reason it's important is other nations have figured this out. They figured out that the secret sauce that's driven the American economy is entrepreneurship. And they're moving very aggressively to put pro-entrepreneurship policy in place. Capital incentives, make it really easy for people to move there in terms of immigration policy, basic research. They're really pushing in a variety of different countries, and as some of these countries kind of rise, it's going to create more and more competition for us, and we need to move aggressively right now to protect that and build on it. Right now, we are the world's most entrepreneurial nation, but it's not like something we can take for granted. And one example that is a little chilling, I think, is we go back to Facebook. The lead investor in Facebook was the venture firm Accel Partners. 10 years ago, Accel had all their venture investors in Silicon Valley. Now they have more venture investors in China than they do in Silicon Valley, 10 years later. That kind of bothers me. And the reason they're doing that is smart for them and smart for their LP. I don't quarrel with that. Is because they believe that's where the opportunity, the capital finds these opportunities. So we really need to make sure we remain the most entrepreneurial nation. And we saw this a lot, particularly in Pennsylvania, obviously, this battle over manufacturing. And we've lost the manufacturing sector. We're fighting to get some of it back, particularly around advanced manufacturing and so forth. But people say, oh, we were asleep at the wheel 20, 30 years ago, and when that was the lead, now we're kind of lost some of that. We have got the lead in entrepreneurship, and I'd hate 20 or 30 years from now for us to be like, what happened? Like, what were we asleep at the wheel? Why didn't we recognize that this was the core to driving our economy, to driving job growth, ensuring competitiveness, and why didn't we do the things that we needed to do, such as things around high-skilled immigration, but there are other things as well to make sure that we can continue to be the magnet for the best and brightest entrepreneurs and engineers, and really the source of the great innovation for the next internets, if you will.
We have questions. I know we have microphones on either side here. You would have to go up to the microphone so we can hear you. There's one right there. You, sir.
Wes Mott. It's two things. How do we get the young generation, the 18 to 30, to compete globally against people that have mastered their own language, our technology, and their own technologies and systems? And where do we find them? How do we educate them? Because not everybody can go to college. Because there aren't enough jobs up there. That's what we're living through. Okay, is everybody trying to be a finance guy? Okay.
Well, it's obviously a complicated question with a lot of different facets to it. I think education system obviously is part of it. We talked earlier about higher ed, but K-12 also needs reinvention. There are a bunch of interesting things happening there, but it's not as widespread as it needs to be. The other thing I focus even on this region. One of the things I also do is share this initiative called the Startup America Partnership, which is trying to build up regional entrepreneurial ecosystems all around the country. So we're actually less reliant on a few places like Silicon Valley, and entrepreneurship spread more broadly. Some of that is capital and things like crowdfunding kind of help on that front. But a lot of it is what happens locally with entrepreneurial leaders basically say, we are going to commit. While we're still running our company, we're still running our venture firms, or whatever we're doing, we're going to commit to work together, kind of in a collaborative way, with some degree of passion and urgency to try to make it easier for companies to get started here and educate people, including going to kind of high schools that would talk about entrepreneurship and mentor these young entrepreneurs when they're getting going, and maybe provide more seed capital, angel capital to get some things get started. It's not rocket science that drives it. It requires a concerted, urgent effort. And so part of it is trying to make sure people understand that that's a path that they might want to consider. They get exposed to different opportunities in their community that they are able to capitalize on, as well as getting the skill set, the education they need to be able to be successful in whatever field they choose. So there's a lot to be done at these regional levels, and I just urge people here to, obviously it's part of the reason for a conference like this, but how do you not just come looking for, maybe you're a company, maybe you're looking for capital, can I find investors, which obviously is important. If you're an investor looking to invest, find a company, that's obviously important. But is there something more that could be done to kind of create more momentum, or what sometimes called a network effect or network density, that knitting together these things that are happening in a more concerted, urgent way. It has to happen at a national level, I mentioned. It really also has to happen at a regional level.
I believe we have a question here on the right.
Yes, my question goes to return on capital and risky inventions, where they're based on, in essence, development of intellectual property rights. And, the concern that I see in the market, with, the lack of protection in China and elsewhere for intellectual property, do you see any impact, in the front-end venture investment, on whether or not these investments in disruptive technologies, will actually yield the return that it's supposed to get for the level of risk?
Yeah, I think it's an important issue. It's been actually a focus in Washington. There was a PACT reform that passed about a year ago, the American Defense Act. I think does some steps in the right direction. Still more work to be done, and particularly make sure the younger entrepreneurial startups aren't disadvantaged by larger companies that have kind of legions of lawyers kind of dealing with this. These young companies can be at the bad end of sort of the patent war kind of thing. But the patent office has done some things to essentially create a fast track for young companies. The big challenge when you have a patentable idea is trying to get that sooner rather than later, because a lot of capital investors are going to sit on the sidelines until they kind of have a clearer path in terms of what's there. So it was taking way too long to kind of review these patents, and they tried to accelerate. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think there's more work to be done, frankly, around patents, particularly some of the things around software patents and business method patents. My own sense is, some things that have been getting patented and probably shouldn't be getting patented, and it's actually ends up stifling innovation and economic growth. So figuring out what's the right balance to create the incentives for the innovator and the investor to back it, at the same time not end up having the lawyers associated with the patent system unintentionally end up kind of stifling some of the innovation, job creation, economic growth that's obviously important action.
Are Apple, Samsung, and Google being overly aggressive in the courts?
Well, they're being aggressive. I'm not sure, given the current rules of the road, I'm not sure I can say they're being overly aggressive. I think they're recognizing that part of the way to win in these technology battles is to basically acquire, either create or acquire large patent positions. And it's sort of like for both offensive and defensive reasons. A little bit like when I was growing up, or counting how many missiles they had, weapons and deterrence and so forth. There is a deterrent aspect to the patent wars that are happening right now, which basically big companies can play that game that smaller companies can't. So it's like anything. These are complicated issues, and you've got to strike the the right balance. I think the American Invents Act was a step in the right direction to try to protect some of this intellectual property. At the same time, we don't want to go too far and end up unintentionally stifling, particularly the work of entrepreneurs. Because one of the things I've learned kind of watching, well, growth, frankly, with the merger with Time Warner was sort of exacerbated, but I've seen this in other ways too, is the business world really is divided into two parts. This is overly simplistic, but it helps make it what. And what I'd say is it's attackers and defenders. Entrepreneurs are attackers. They're disruptors. They're challenging the status quo. They're trying to usher in a new way. At some point, companies get large and become defenders. Fortune 500 companies are, by definition, defenders. And the people running those companies are basically there to manage and hedge risk. They're trying to grow, but they're mostly trying to keep what they've got. It's like in sports, like a protect defense. That's what they're basically implementing. That's important. Fortune 500 companies are a key part of our economy, and so when we get that skill set, managing these large, complicated enterprises, it's actually very, very important. We need to make sure we don't lose sight that the attackers are the ones that drive the innovation and economic growth and job creation. So if in doubt, skew your policy towards making it easier for the attackers. Most of the defenders, in fact, all the defenders are the ones who hire legions of lobbyists to try to slow down the attackers and try to kind of stabilize and lock in the firewall the status quo. I understand why they do that. It's like if you're running one of those companies, that's the right thing to do. But let's not make sure we, because we're hearing those voices, which are pretty powerful, we lose sight of the fact that really are these kind of crazy entrepreneurs who believe there's a better way, are willing to kind of put everything on the line to pursue that. They're the ones that create the companies that drive our economy and really drive our country. So they're both important, but let's make sure we as a nation, even at a community level, support and embrace and celebrate these crazy entrepreneurs who are willing to be attackers and challenge the status quo, because as we all know, the failure rate is high. It's a risky thing to do. We need to make sure that that's encouraged and celebrated and not somehow tamped down, or worse, in some communities. I can't speak to Philadelphia. I guess Philadelphia, this region, does pretty well. But there are parts of the country that actually are very risk averse and very unsupportive of entrepreneurs. It's like, oh, that's risky. And if an entrepreneur's first idea fails, in some of these communities, they're failures. They're not failures. Their first idea failed. They all failed a bunch of times before it became an overnight success. It's like a decade to figure it out. But there's some places that basically, instead of saying, isn't it awesome you took that chance, hopefully you learned something, maybe you can build on that, maybe the next one better, the next one after that. That's how innovation happens. And just recognizing that it is a core value we need to celebrate and encourage is I think really, really important.
Another question for Steve Case. Microphones count.
Hi, my name is Sujean. My question actually goes back to your mentioning of Apple and Samsung. So both extremely innovative companies that are in somewhat similar fields, but that exist in extremely different cultures, and yet are at the cutting edge of innovation. So you have Apple that obviously was birthed in the US, where some of our core ideals are risk-taking and failing fast and learning from that, versus South Korea, where the culture is very risk-averse and sort of shuns failure and sort of scarlet letter. And I'm curious how you reconcile that you would have such divergent cultures produce two companies that are really neck and neck in terms of innovation.
Well, I'd say two things. I'm certainly not an expert, but I'd say two things. One would be that 30, 40 years ago, South Korea was pretty hungry. They were like fighting for something. They were really trying to. They needed to build their. This is the United States 200 years ago. Remember, the United States was a startup 200 years ago. Sorry, here, but it was a startup. We were, there's a certain hunger when you basically have to build something, and it's almost like nothing to lose. I think that's a driver. Japan, meanwhile, has gotten to be a little less attacked, a little more defended, and and some of the, Sony, which 20, 30 years ago was, really the dominant consumer electronic company, well, it's still a great company, but it's lost some of that. And I think that's sort of a dynamic. The second is, and this is changing, and part of the reason to make sure we do win this battle with talent around engineering, and I try to get, things, interventions happening here, is over time, the process innovation that happens as things are iterated, particularly in manufacturing, over time the expertise builds up in other areas, and they really shift from being kind of implementers to being inventors. And I think that's started to happen in some regions around the world. So they wouldn't necessarily have been the ones to come up with the idea of a smartphone or something, but they are pretty good at optimizing and tweaking and improving it and constantly kind of getting better. As markets develop to a certain point, that skill set of really how do you take it to scale is something that some of these countries, some of these cultures are pretty good at. They're not necessarily as good on the invention side, but there is a fear, which is why I mentioned some of the comments about entrepreneurship in America, making sure that we don't shift into being kind of a more conservative defender kind of nation, and some others kind of become more aggressive and more innovative and driving kind of the next wave of not just companies, but entire industries. Wherever those industries are birthed and expand, it creates enormous economic growth and opportunity for those nations.